The history of South America. History of South America, Table of Contents.
All about the history of South America.
Dr. Sydney Soclof. Dr. Sydney 22@gmail.com. 2023. Narration by Dr. Sydney Soclof.
Zoe Phonemes.
And Nathan Koltove. For a complete discussion of YouTube navigation, please go to tiny.1/ytnavigator. The history of South America.
South America is thought to have been first inhabited by people crossing the Bering Land Bridge, now the Bering Strait. However, there are also suggestions of migration from the southern Pacific Ocean. The Native American peoples migrated many thousands of years ago from Asia over the land bridge over the Bering Sea.
The Aztec, Maya, and Inca civilizations were established in these regions of Mesoamerica and South America.
Over the course of millennia, people spread to all parts of the continent. By 1000 AD, South America's vast rainforests, mountains, plains, and coasts were the home of tens of millions of people.
The Aztec people were certain ethnic groups of central Mexico, particularly those groups who spoke the Nahuatl language and who dominated large parts of Mesoamerica in the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries.
This was a period referred to as the late post-classic period in Mesoamerican chronology.
This is the Aztec pyramid at St. Cecilia Catitlan in Mexico.
This is a map of the Aztec Empire.
The Maya is a Mesoamerican civilization, noted for the only known fully developed written language of the pre-Columbian Americas, as well as its art, architecture, and mathematical and astronomical systems. The Maya were initially established during the pre-classic period, circa 2000 BC to 250 AD. According to the Mesoamerican chronology, many Maya cities reached their highest state of development during the Classic period, circa 250 AD to 900 AD, and continued throughout the post-Classic period until the arrival of the Spanish.
This is a Maya pyramid. This shows the location of the Maya area in southern Mexico and Central America.
The Maya people never disappeared, neither at the time of the Classic period decline, nor with the arrival of the Spanish conquistadores and the subsequent Spanish colonization of the Americas. Today, the Maya and their descendants form sizable populations throughout the Maya area, and maintain a distinctive set of traditions and beliefs that are the result of the merger of pre-Columbian and post-conquest ideas and cultures. Many Mayan languages continue to be spoken as primary languages today.
Some 5 to 7 million people lived in the Amazon region, divided between comparatively dense coastal settlements and monomadic inland dwellers.
The nomadic inland dwellers of the Amazon live in a complex combination of agriculture, alteration of the forest ecosystem, and hunting and gathering.
According to some estimates and archaeological finds, the Chavin, a South American pre-literate civilization, established a trade network and developed agriculture by 900 BC. Artifacts were found at a site called Chavin in modern Peru, at an elevation of 3,177 meters. Chavin's civilization spanned 900 BC to 300 BC.
The Moche Inca civilization that thrived on the north coast of Peru about 1,500 to 2,000 years ago. Skilled artisans. The Moche were technologically advanced people who traded with faraway peoples. Like the Maya,
Almost everything we know about the Moche comes from their ceramic pottery with carvings of their daily lives. We know from these records that they practiced human sacrifice and had blood-drinking rituals.
The Inca civilization dominated the Andes region from 1438 to 1533 from their capital at the great city of Cusco. Inca rule extended to nearly 100 linguistic or ethnic communities, with some 9 to 14 million people connected by a 25,000 kilometers road system.
Cusco is the historic capital of the Inca Empire and was declared a World Heritage Site in 1983 by UNESCO.
Cusco is a major tourist destination that receives almost 1 million visitors a year. It is designated as the historical capital of Peru by the Constitution of Peru.
This is Cusco in Machu Picchu in modern-day Peru.
Inca cities were built with precise, unmatched stonework, constructed over many levels of mountain terrain. Terrace farming was a useful form of agriculture. Machu Picchu in Quechua, Machu Picchu, meaning Old Mountain, is a pre-Columbian 15th century Inca site located 7,970 feet, 2,430 meters, above sea level.
There is evidence of excellent metalwork and even successful brain surgery in Inca civilization. Machu Picchu is situated on a mountain ridge above the Urubamba Valley in Peru. 50 miles, 80 kilometers, northwest of Cusco, and through which the Urubamba River flows. Most archaeologists believe that Machu Picchu was built as an estate for the Inca Emperor Pachacuti, 1438 to 1472. Often referred to as the Lost City of the Incas, it is perhaps the most familiar icon of the Inca world.
The Incas started building the estate around 1400 AD, but abandoned it as an official site for the Inca rulers a century later at the time of the Spanish Conquest.
Although known locally, it was unknown to the outside world before being brought to international attention in 1911 by the American historian Hiram Bingham. Since then, Machu Picchu has become an important tourist attraction. Since the site was never known to the Spanish during their conquest, it is highly significant as a relatively intact cultural site.
Machu Picchu was declared a Peruvian historical sanctuary in 1981 and a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983 and 2007. Machu Picchu was voted one of the new 7 wonders of the world in a worldwide internet poll.
European colonization. Marco Polo was a Venetian trader and explorer who gained fame for his worldwide travels.
The worldwide travels of Marco Polo were recorded in the book Il Milione, the Million, or the Travels of Marco Polo. Marco Polo, together with his father Niccolo and his uncle Maffeo, was one of the first Westerners to travel the Silk Road to China, which was then called Cathay, and visit the great Khan of the Mongol Empire, Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan.
This shows the travels of Marco Polo.
These are the trade routes of the 4 mariner republics, Venice, Genoa, Pisa and Amalfi. The beginning of Turkish invasions in the middle of the 15th century marked the decline of Venetian supremacy.
Venice faced a new threat from the Ottoman Turks who were blocking her eastern trade routes. During the 15th and 16th centuries, Portugal eclipsed most other nations in terms of economic, political, and cultural influence, and it had an extensive empire throughout the world.
The Portuguese empire was the earliest and longest-lived of the modern European colonial empires, spanning almost 6 centuries. From the capture of Ceuta in North Africa in 1415 to the handover of Macau to China in 1999.
In this map, red shows the actual possessions of Portugal. Pink shows explorations, areas of influence, and trade and claims of sovereignty. And blue indicates the main sea explorations, routes, and areas of influence. Starting in the 15th century, Portuguese explorers such as Vasco da Gama and Pedro Álvares Cabral carved out a vast empire for Portugal with vast colonies in South America and Africa, as well as colonies in Asia.
Portugal, under the tutelage of Prince Henry the Navigator and the voyages of Vasco da Gama, was one of the first to explore the Atlantic Ocean and was the first to find a route around Africa to the Spice Islands of Asia.
The Portuguese colonies indeed rivaled those of Spain in extent. At one time, it was the tiny country of Portugal that was at the forefront of world exploration. The Portuguese began their colonial history in the 15th century with a colony established in Angola, followed by Mozambique and other colonies in Africa. Horizontal ellipsis. South America, notably Brazil, and Asia.
This MP finally ended some 500 years later, when the last colony that Portugal released was Macau in 1999. Portugal was one of the last countries to hold on to a colony into the late 20th century.
July 25, 1415 marked the beginning of the Portuguese Empire, with the Portuguese Armada along with King John I and his sons Prince Duarte, future king, Prince Pedro,
Prince Henry the Navigator and Prince Alfonso. Also with the legendary Portuguese hero Nuno Alvares Pereira. They departed for Ceuta in North Africa, a rich trade Islamic center. On August 21, 1415, Ceuta was conquered by Portugal, and the long-lived Portuguese Empire was founded.
Although he was called Prince Henry the Navigator by the English, Prince Henry never actually sailed on any of the voyages of discovery he sponsored. Instead, Prince Henry established a school for the study of the arts of navigation, map-making, and shipbuilding. This would allow sailors to better guide their ships and to develop new ship designs.
The Madeira Islands archipelago is considered to be the first discovery of the exploratory period, initiated by Prince Henry, the Navigator of Portugal. The financial incentive to discover an alternative to Venice's monopoly control of the trade routes to Asia was perhaps the single most important factor in starting the Great Age of exploration.
Being unable to break the hold of Venice, there was a determination in the last third of the 15th century to build ships and to venture in search of an route to the spice-producing countries of Asia.
Portuguese explorers began exploring the coast of Africa in 1419, using the latest developments in navigation, cartography and maritime technology such as the caravel, to find a sea route to the source of the lucrative spice trade. In 1488, Bartholomew Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. This is the voyage of Bartholomew Dias, rounding the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa in 1488.
Thereafter, faced with attacks by foreign invaders and the Italian states, the power of Venice waned.
The discovery of a sea route to the Indies around the Cape of Good Hope by the Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama in 1497 and 1498 accelerated the decline of Venice. This began the famous voyages of discovery. Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama found a route around the southern tip of Africa to India in 1498. This is the route followed in Vasco da Gama's first voyage of 1497 and 1499. This shows Vasco da Gama landing at Calicut in India in 1498. The Portuguese were the first to bring spices from India and Asia to Europe by way of the Cape of Good Hope in 1501. For more than 100 years Portugal was the dominant power, but eventually yielded to English and Dutch enterprise and conquest.
These setbacks occurred at a time when new trading routes to India and China via the Cape of Good Hope enabled the English Dutch and Portuguese to undercut Venetian merchants.
For European commercial interests it was an age of rewarding success, which broke the monopoly of Venice, overcame the Muslim domination of the spice trade, created a large trade and a great variety of merchandise between Europe and the Far East, and opened up a new world.
The Spanish era. The first European to enter the Caribbean Sea was Christopher Columbus, who was searching for a shorter sea route to the rich East Indies. The previous routes involved a very long trip around the southern tip of Africa and then eastward across the Indian Ocean. When Columbus made his voyage in 1492, he was searching for a route westward across the Atlantic Ocean to the Spice Islands of the Indies in Southeast Asia.
In the days before refrigeration, spices were very important to the Europeans for helping to preserve meat and to make it taste better.
The Spice Islands are mostly in the area of Southeast Asia that is present-day Indonesia.
This was the route taken by ships in Columbus' day, around the southern tip of Africa, and eastward to the Spice Islands of Asia.
The fleet consisted of 3 ships: the Nina, Pinta, and Columbus' flagship, the Santa Maria.
The expedition led by Columbus used 3 ships: the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria.
The first voyage of Columbus left from Palos in Spain,
then southwest from Palos to the Canary Islands. From there Columbus sailed almost due west across the broad Atlantic Ocean.
Columbus made landfall in the Bahamas in 1492 and was convinced that he had discovered a new route to Asia.
Columbus then continued south to establish a key Spanish colony on the island of Hispaniola, now divided politically between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. After landing in the Bahamas, Columbus named these islands the Indies, because he thought he had finally reached Asia and the East Indies.
In his 4 voyages, Columbus discovered the major features of the region. On October 12, 1492, Columbus made landfall at San Salvador, an island in the Bahamas, now called Waterling Island. Columbus thought that he had indeed reached the Indies of Asia. He therefore called the inhabitants of the land Indians.
Later on, when Spanish cartographers realized that these islands were not the Indies of Southeast Asia, they called them the West Indies to distinguish them from the Spice Islands in the Pacific Ocean, or the East Indies, which we now call Indonesia. This map shows the 4 voyages of Columbus to the New World in 1492, 1493, 1498, and 1502. Note that all 4 voyages were to the Caribbean region. All 4 voyages were to the West Indies, and the voyage of 1502 to 1504 also included stops in Central America. The voyage of 1498 to 1500 included stops in the South American regions near Trinidad and Tobago. After the Caribbean was visited by Christopher Columbus in 1493, Spain claimed the area, and its ships searched for treasure.
With the Spanish discovery of the Pacific Ocean in 1513, the Caribbean became the main route of their expeditions and, later, of convoys.
The main Spanish interest was treasure on the mainland of South America and, to a lesser extent, in the Greater Antilles.
The discovery of Brazil.
Pedro Álvares Cabral was a Portuguese navigator and explorer, regarded as the first European discoverer of the sea route to Brazil in 1500. After the Portuguese established their colony in East Africa, they looked to the Americas. In 1500, either by accident or by the Portuguese crown's secret intent, Pedro Álvares Cabral made landfall on the coast of South America, leading to the establishment of the colony of Brazil. This is Cabral's ship.
The Portuguese Empire was guaranteed by the Papal Decree of 1493. This divided the world outside of Europe exclusively between the Portuguese and the Spanish. As a result of this, all of Africa and almost all of Asia would belong to Portugal, while almost all of the New World would belong to Spain.
The following year Spain and Portugal agreed in the Treaty of Tordesillas to move the dividing line about 800 miles west.
This treaty would give South America a bilingual European heritage. Today Portuguese is the language of Brazil, while Spanish is spoken in most of the rest of the continent. As accurate measurements of longitude were impossible by the time, the line was not strictly enforced, resulting in a Portuguese expansion of Brazil across the meridian. Two other treaties established spheres of influence between Spain and Portugal. They were the Treaty of Alcáçovas in 1479, and the Treaty of Zaragoza in 1529.
From 1580 to 1640, the throne of Portugal was held by the Habsburg kings of Spain, resulting in the biggest colonial empire in history.
The Portuguese empire was still very large even into the early years of the 19th century, with Brazil, Angola, Mozambique and many of the smaller colonies.
The Spanish Conquest.
In 1519, the Spanish explorer and Cortés came to Mexico. The Aztecs thought he was the returned Quetzalcoatl, so they did not want to fight against him. Cortés allied himself with the enemies of the Aztecs. In 1521, the Spanish conquered the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan.
The Aztec Empire became part of Spain, called New Spain. Beginning in the 1530s, the people and natural resources of South America were repeatedly exploited by foreign conquistadors, first from Spain and later from Portugal.
These competing colonial nations claimed the land and resources as their own, and divided it into colonies. The Spanish conquest of South America started in the north and then went south along the west coast through present-day Peru and into Bolivia.
Spain was primarily interested in riches, gold and silver from its colonies in the New World. The main interest in this region was the finding of riches, gold and silver in particular. The gold and silver riches of the Inca Empire drew the Spanish conquistadors down to Peru. Lima in Peru became the most important Spanish colonial city in the area. Then the discovery of the fabulously rich silver deposits of the Cerro Rico or Rich Hill at Potosí in present-day Bolivia added to this interest.
The initial colonization of Argentina was in the northwest corner. The Spanish colonies fell mainly to supply mules and grain for the silver mines further north.
The main trade route was north from Argentina and Peru up the coast to Panama, and then across to the Caribbean and the Atlantic Ocean to Spain.
King Philip III of Spain ordered that the trade route in South America should go up the west coast through Lima and Peru to Panama, and then across to Isthmus to the Caribbean, and on to Spain.
The trade from Cádiz in Spain to Lima took close to 6 months.
Any goods the settlers wanted to sell took 6 months to reach Spain. A complete round-trip exchange between Buenos Aires and Spain could take an year. In 1776, Spain created one large colony of its territories in southeastern South America. It was called the Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata. Buenos Aires became its capital and a flourishing port.
The Viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata encompassed the present-day countries of Bolivia, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina.
These were the 4 Spanish viceroyalties in the Americas.
European diseases, smallpox, influenza, measles and typhus, to which the native populations had no resistance, and cruel systems of forced labor, such as the infamous haciendas and the mining industries decimated the American population under Spanish control.
After this, African slaves, who had developed immunities to these diseases, we quickly brought in to replace them. The Spaniards we committed to converting the American subjects to Christianity, and we quick to purge any native cultural practices that hindered this end.
However, most initial attempts at this were only partially successful, as American groups simply blended Catholicism with their traditional beliefs. The Spaniards did not impose their language to the degree they did their religion. In fact, the Catholic Church's evangelization of the Quechua, Nahuatl, and Guarani actually contributed to the expansion of these American languages, equipping them with writing systems. Eventually the natives and the Spaniards interbred, forming a mestizo class, or race. Mestizos in the original Americans were often forced to pay unfair taxes to the Spanish government, and were punished harshly for disobeying their laws.
Many native artworks we considered pagan idols and we destroyed by Spanish explorers. This included many gold and silver sculptures, which we melted down before transport to Europe.
The Spanish colonies won their independence in the first quarter of the 19th century. In the South American Wars of Independence,
this shows the non-Native American nations' control over South America from 1700 and on. Spain over the years got weaker. The vast revenues of gold and silver from the Americas were not put to good use. France and especially England rose to challenge the naval power of Spain, and Spain suffered a major defeat of the Spanish Armada by England in 1588. Spain was defeated in the Napoleonic Wars and invaded by Napoleon in 1808. This gave the opportunity for the Spanish colonies to declare their independence.
The independence movements all over Latin America in the years from 1804 to 1825.
Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín led the independence struggles.
Argentina in 1816 was one of the first countries to get independence from Spain. Simón Bolívar led independence movements in the northern part of South America, resulting in the Republic of Colombia.
The Republic of Gran Colombia, 1819 to 1830, was a federation comprised of Venezuela, New Granada and Ecuador.
When the Republic of Gran Colombia dissolved in 1830, Panama became a province of New Granada, later to be renamed Colombia. This was an unstable relationship that lasted 73 years. In the Portuguese colony of Brazil, Dom Pedro I, also Pedro IV of Portugal, son of the Portuguese King Dom João VI, proclaimed Brazil's independence in 1822 and became Brazil's first emperor.
This was peacefully accepted by the crown in Portugal. Upon compensation,
although Bolívar attempted to keep the Spanish-speaking parts of the continent politically unified, they rapidly became independent of one another as well, and several further wars were fought, such as the War of the Triple Alliance and the War of the Pacific.
A few countries did not gain independence until the 20th century. Trinidad and Tobago from the United Kingdom in 1962, Guyana from the United Kingdom in 1966, and Suriname from Dutch control in 1975.
The South American continent, like many others, became a battlefield of the Cold War in the late 20th century. In 1967, Marxists took power and nationalized nearly everything in Chile.
In 1970, Salvador Allende Gossens, a Marxist physician and member of Chile's Socialist Party, was elected president of Chile. In 1973, President Salvador Allende of Chile was toppled in a bloody military coup in Santiago. In the period of 1973 to 1980, General Augusto Pinochet led a dictatorship. In 1980, Pinochet became president.
In 1990, General Augusto Pinochet gave up power after 16 years of rule.
Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, Peru suffered from internal conflicts. 1976 – a military government takes control of Argentina. Parts of the constitution we suspended. This was a period of military dictatorship and repression during which thousands of presumed dissidents we disappeared or murdered. This era ended in the disastrous Falkland Islands War of 1982. When Argentina invaded the South Atlantic islands it claimed as its own and was defeated by British forces in a short but bloody campaign. This defeat led to the fall of the military regime and the re-establishment of democratic rule, which has since endured despite various economic crises.
The Falkland Islands War is also called the Falklands War, the Malvinas War, or the South Atlantic War. This was a brief, undeclared war fought between Argentina and Great Britain in 1982 over the control of the Falkland Islands, Islas Malvinas, and associated island dependencies. Argentina had claimed sovereignty over the Falkland Islands, which are 300 miles, or 480 kilometers east of its coast, since the early 19th century.
However, Britain had occupied and administered the islands since 1833, and had consistently rejected Argentina's claims.
The decision to invade was chiefly political. The junta, which was being criticized for economic mismanagement and human rights abuses, believed that the recovery of the islands would unite Argentines behind the government in a patriotic fervor.
In early 1982 the Argentine military junta led by Lieutenant General Leopoldo Galtieri gave up on long-running negotiations with Britain and instead launched an invasion of the islands. Las Malvinas son Argentinas. The Malvinas are Argentinian.
Argentine troops invaded the Falklands on April 2, rapidly overcoming the small garrison of British Marines at the capital of Stanley, Port Stanley. They obeyed orders not to inflict any British casualties, despite losses to their own units. The next day Argentines seized the associated islands of South Georgia and the South Sandwich Group. By late April Argentina had stationed more than 10,000 troops on the Falklands, although the vast majority of these were poorly trained conscripts. As expected, the Argentine populace reacted favorably, with large crowds gathering at the Plaza de Mayo in front of the presidential palace to demonstrate support for the military initiative. Other revolutions and military dictatorships have been common. This graph shows the dictatorships in Latin America and the Caribbean from 1934 to 1992. International indebtedness became a notable problem, as most recently illustrated by Argentina's default in the early 21st century.
Recommended videos.
Recommended video: History of South America every year, 4 minutes, 45 seconds.
Recommended video: Why didn't the Spanish colonies unify like the USA? 5 minutes, 56 seconds.
Recommended video: South America Timeline, 5 minutes, 15 seconds.
History of South America, Table of Contents.
Thanks for watching. Please watch some more of my great videos.